The headline of our first panel this morning is Going Further, Faster. 4 mayors will now share both their successes and the challenges they face as they deliver on their deadline 2020 commitments. To moderate this session, we will have up here on stage now Jesper Nygård, CEO of Realdania, will come up here to the stage, and our participants, Adjei Sowah, Mayor of Accra, Durkan, Mayor of Seattle, Belmonte, Mayor of Quezon City, and Müller, Governing Mayor of Berlin. Welcome, and the stage is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Connie, and good morning, everyone. It's a great honor for me to moderate this panel about going further, faster, what needs to happen to deliver the future we want. Just to follow up on Mark's brilliant way of expressing the thoughts of C40, the Green New Deal, and all the other stuff we have to work together about to make a safer world and a better world. I will start with a little practical information. Our German mayor from Berlin, Mayor Müller, will speak in German. So those of you who haven't picked up a headset, I could recommend you to just silently move to the back and get it, so you will be able to have German translated into English, French, or Spanish, if you don't speak German fluently. So that's just a practical information. As Connie said, my name is Jesper Nygård. I'm the CEO of Realdania. We have the great honor of being one of the three strategic funders behind C40, together with Bloomberg and SIF. We work with the built environment as a philanthropist here in Denmark, and we are co-host to the summit. Mark had this opening remark about how do we create the future we want. How do we set the debate who is already on scope? How do we do that faster? How do we do it further? What do we do to deliver the 1.5 degrees Celsius future that we want? And C40 is about network. C40 is about knowledge, about sharing, and about scaling. So this panel will be about some concrete experiences. How can we learn from each other? How can we take stories and use them other places? How can we copy from each other, both from the good stories and from some of the challenges we all have? Everybody here understands that the next decade in our lifetime will be about action. So we have to share some experiences. On the stage, I have 4 distinguished mayors. I have Mayor Sowah. Was that right? Mayor Sowah of the great city of Accra in Ghana. He's been there since 2017. He's a social entrepreneur, and he represents the African mayors in the C40 Cities Steering Committee, our top board. Then we have Mayor Durkan from Seattle. She's also been a mayor since 2017, the great city of Seattle. She is a civic leader and former US attorney for the Western District of Washington. Thirdly, we have Mayor Adjei Belmonte from the great city of Quezon. Is that correct?
Quezon, yeah.
Quezon City, the largest city in the Philippines and located in the metro of Manila, the national capital region. Just elected mayor here in June, but vice mayor since 2010, so very experienced. And last but not least, our German participant, Mayor Müller from Berlin, the great city, one of our closest neighbors in Berlin. And he has been the governing mayor since 2014, and he's former president of the Federal Council in Germany. So welcome to the 4 of you, and shouldn't we start giving them a hand of applause? So thank you so much for participating, and thank you for 2 promises we made each other out there in the green room, who was not green. The one was that we would be frank and give some good examples others can share of, and the other one was to do what mayors don't often do, speak brief and short. And I'm quite sure we made that agreement out there before. I will start with you, Mayor Sowah of Accra. You have been doing some very excellent work of waste management. You have doing some work with informal operators. How can this help you in delivering your vision of a low carbon future? And how can other cities learn from your approach?
Well, thank you very much. And one good thing about what we're doing in Accra, when I assumed office in March 2017, the following month, the president of our nation also made an open and bold declaration that he wants Accra to become the cleanest city in the whole of Africa by 2020. That was a very ambitious statement that he made. Because in Accra, around that time, we had lots of issues about waste management. We had 40 illegal dump sites within the city itself, and people also litter. However, we also recognize that as much as the formal sector collectors have been doing so well, the informal sector collectors collect over 35% of the waste from the various households. And they have to go and dump it somewhere, and they have created the over 40 illegal dump sites. So as much as they may be collecting the waste from the households, but they dump it at open sites. So what do we do to be able to address the issues of Clean Accra? We also recognize the fact that it is not just about Clean Accra, but it's the economy around it and an environmental concerns also around it. So in planning the integration of the informal sector, you know, to focus also on the economy around it as much as the environment as well. There are a few interventions also that we make. We close down 90% of the illegal dump sites and cap some of them or evacuate some of them. But what it means that you have to provide an alternative, because the informal sector collectors cannot travel over 90 kilometers round trip to go and dump and come. So quickly we have to start constructing waste transfer stations so that they will have a shorter turnaround time to go and dump and come. We also recognize the fact that it also creates an economy for the informal sector, because initially when we came with it, they understand that, and when we're closing them, as if we are also kicking them out of job. And in the end, there were a lot of people that become doing some bad things as well. So once you are promoting the informal sector, you are also creating an economy. And let me also hasten to say that there's some wonderful innovation that is coming out from the informal sector in terms of waste recycling, the beautiful things that they are also doing in the informal sector. So the quick interventions that we put in place by recognizing the informal sector collectors, by so doing, we are evacuating all the waste, and they are doing the recycling, and you will not be finding the waste also on the streets and the heaps of refuse that we usually found on the streets of Accra. In fact, we had mountains of refuse in it. Because when we did our inventory, we also recognized the fact that one of the key sources of emissions is the burning of waste in Accra. So once we are tackling the issues of waste and recognizing the informal sector, indeed, we are also reducing our emissions as well.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Very interesting knowledge sharing and very good example. And when I get back to you in the next round, could you say so? Just prepare something about involving citizens, and
Sure.
it could be very interesting. Now on to the mayor of Seattle, Mayor Durkan. You live in a country where, when the Paris Declaration were agreed, there was cooperation between cities and central government. And right now you have another situation, but you're still working on how to fulfill the ambition of the Paris Agreement. How is it being a mayor in a situation where the federal leadership is lacking on this issue? Does it give a bigger stage for the issue, or is it more difficult? Could you share some experiences how it is to work when city and government are not aligned?
Thank you for that, and thank you for being here. I think we have to do both. One, it does make it harder, because the federal government has not only stepped away from its obligations, but it's taking stances to make it more difficult. For example, the state of California has some of the strongest laws regarding vehicle emissions, and the federal government's now trying to stop them from imposing those. And so we have to both fight the federal government, but then we also know that it also in some ways liberates us, because we can't meet our goals unless cities act together. And that would be true whether or not the federal government was acting, because as we heard, most people will live in cities in America, so we have to take steps in America. So I think it has forced and galvanized the mayors of America to come together and say that climate is not a partisan issue. It's not Republican or Democrat, it's about the future of our planet, all of our planet. And so I think having the President Trump take such a strong stance against climate has been terrible in many regards, but it's been good because it has said those who can act must act.
Thank you so much. It's a very important and interesting way of saying it, that climate is not politics, climate is for humanity.
Exactly.
Makes agenda much more broad.
And I think you said, yesterday I was able to participate in the youth panel, and I think that that is also the future hope. We see youth coming together worldwide in a way that they haven't been galvanized by other issues. And that only makes us act, it also gives us hope. So I'm very inspired by youth, and now we have an obligation to show them that we adults can really meet what they need.
Yeah. And it's gonna be interesting to see that when the youth have taken over the City Hall of Copenhagen, that all these decisions they take today and all these advices they will give to the Lord Mayor, if he's going to implement them, that's going to be. We will follow that in the next week, Mr. Lord Mayor. And then on to you, Mayor Belmonte from Quezon City. Could you say something about your very, very interesting discussion and initiatives about ban on plastic bags and the no segregation, no collection policy you have had in your city? What has been the main challenges doing that, implementing that, and what will you think if you look 5 or 10 years ahead in future, what will this law have helped to transform your city?
Well, in 2009, we were surprised to have had 3 or 4 days of incessant rain, never before experienced in our country, specifically in our city. And our floods were terrible at that time. But what surprised us is when the floods subsided, everything was filled with plastic. So then we realized that the canals, the waterways were all clogged up with plastic, which was one of the causes of the floods, in our city. So when I became the vice mayor, one of the first things we did was to pass a law, first regulating the use of plastic bags. And we didn't want to do things in a drastic way because we wanted to do things gradually. And that was accepted by most people. And then I'm happy to say that just last month, we passed a measure totally banning all plastic bags in our city, and not only that, but also banning all single-use plastic bags. And and the important thing I would like to point out is in a city like Quezon City, where people are generally living not very prosperous lives, climate change takes a back seat. But when it is an issue that they can relate with, like flooding, for example, or it affects their daily lives, then that is the way we should structure the discourse so that people can relate and can participate in issues pertaining to addressing climate crises. And so the second one you wanted me to talk about very, very quickly is we have a policy in Quezon City wherein if you do not segregate your trash into biodegradable and degradable wastes, we do not collect your wastes. And so because of that policy, 86% of our wastes are segregated at source, and more than 56% are diverted from the landfills. And again, we had to use structure the discourse in terms of you can make money by segregating, by recycling, and we sell their products to junk shops, etc. And the poor people can make something out of it, and they now cooperate with things that if you structure the discourse in terms of reductions of emission by 40%, etc., they will never be able to cooperate. It has to be something they can relate to.
Thank you very much. And two very, very practical and good, two very concrete stories to share and two very concrete methods. So thank you a lot. It's interesting not to collect if it's not done correctly in the household. So thank you very much. Now it's time for the headset. If you don't speak German fluently, and on to the great city of Berlin and Mayor Müller. You have recently affirmed your commitment to the C40's Deadline 2020 program. And as I understand it, you are on track to make a 50% reduction of your emission by 2030 and to achieve a zero emission by 2050. Could you say something, what are you doing, which are the most important things to achieve on delivering on the Paris Agreement?
Ja, mache ich sehr gerne. Vielen
Well, of course, it is my pleasure. Of course, we also have a lot to do in order to achieve those very ambitious goals, and that is why, of course, in the framework of C40, it is a brilliant opportunity to exchange information and knowledge. And it's not just one path. There's no magic silver bullet that just solves all the issues. There's many different steps that will lead us to a great result. And of course, we're here today in the beautiful city of Copenhagen, and we can look at fantastic results, and I believe a lot of cities around the globe are looking at the traffic policy here in Copenhagen in order to derive their own insights from that. Now, when it comes to achieving our own targets, we've actually got 3 long-term goals. Number 1, we want to complete decarbonization. Now, 2 years ago, we've decided to completely remove ourselves from brown coal, for our electricity and heat production, and until 2030 we are going to be completely removed from coal energy production. Even lignite is not going to be a role in that anymore. I believe that is a very important step towards the future in order to completely forego energy from coal. The second point is that we are switching our public transport to electromobility. That is a huge undertaking in Berlin. We have to order hundreds of buses right now in these years in order to make sure that we have this electromobility offering going forward. And unfortunately, we have to find that the industry cannot deliver as quickly as we need it. Now, I assume this is going to be true for many mayors here, that we would do things much faster if we actually had the right answers from businesses and industries. And I do hope that this conference will make sure that we can create an additional pressure, that we can drive technical solutions in order to make sure that we get somewhere with our cities. And the third point is that until 2030, we want to have at least 25% of our electricity production derived from solar power. And only by expanding solar power on public buildings, on roofs and on the sides of buildings of the city of Berlin, if we do that, this is going to contribute hugely, and of course it also requires lots of investment. Now, maybe just one short-term measure at the very end, if we're talking about public transport, and if we say that it is so crucial to achieve our climate targets, if it is so crucial to reduce individual traffic, then of course we have to make public transport more attractive. And that is why we are currently step by step introducing a very affordable pricing system. Children and students in Berlin get free public transport. For senior citizens, for people who receive social benefits, for trainees and interns across different companies, so for young employees, we have particularly affordable, particularly social pricing systems, and we're going to introduce a 365 euro ticket. You might know it from Vienna already, where basically you can just have 1 euro per day that allows you to use every public transport available 365 days per year. So with 1 euro per day, you can be mobile without having to use your car. And I think that is a very attractive offering in order to make sure that you don't need to use your car.
Thank you very much. Extremely ambitious and extremely... Where did it go? Extremely ambitious and very, very interesting to hear about. Could you, and I would like in the last round we could go back the other way, and could you just use these cases to say something about the difficult parts, where when citizens or businesses don't agree, or where in your council you have different opinions on different priorities. Could you say something about some of the tough decisions doing what you have been doing, or maybe when you come to the implementation phase, what do you see will be difficult?
Well, I also believe that this unites us, that in order to achieve our targets, we of course have to get the citizens on our sides. Now, we can decide lots of things politically. We can also implement lots of things just from our administration. But at the end of the day, each and every single citizen needs to support it, needs to live our political decisions. And winning over people is really not that easy. Now, on the one hand, of course, we see the demonstration, and Madame Hidalgo just mentioned the Fridays for Future. So we know that lots of people are willing to do something, but we need to incentivize people. And I've just given you the mobility example, but there's an additional point that I believe is crucial. If we want to do something with buildings, if we want to invest into new energy production, if we want to invest in new insulation, if we want to make sure that heating works better, that CO2 emissions from buildings can be reduced, then we also need to incentivize that. And that is why at the moment we do have programs in place that after the investments, that after the renovations in the buildings, we don't want to have any increasing rents, no increasing cost for the citizens. So we are calling it rent neutrality. So the investment into the building doesn't automatically mean rising costs for the people living there. And I think that is important because each and every single citizen needs to feel the investments, needs to see that the decisions that the politicians make for positive health and environmental policy, I can profit off of that myself, not only in 20 or 30 years, no, right today. And I can see that. I think that's crucial.
Much. And Mayor Belmonte, could you say something about the barriers and difficult things, and how did people react on the no segregation, no collection of the trash, for example, and how did you involve people in this transformation?
Well, first, in terms of the barriers, I think we share the same problem with the mayor of Seattle, in that the national government does not give us much assistance or support in terms of the addressing climate crises, because we are already experiencing the results of it. In fact, I always tell the people the most difficult job I have now is actually deciding whether I should suspend school or not, just because of how erratic our weather has become in the Philippines now. And so the responsibility of having to address climate change must lie in the cities and not have to rely on the national government's impetus. So with regards to your second question pertaining to challenges, another challenge is because when, like I mentioned, when you live in a country where the people do not have the basic needs, when you talk about climate change as an issue, especially when you're a politician, nobody takes that seriously because they want something immediate. And climate change requires long-term planning, and something that maybe they will not experience the results in their lifetime. So again, the challenge is structuring the conversation in a way that they will understand it. And so far, we have been able to do that with creativity and working with young people who understand the issues more.
Thank you very much. Mayor Durkan, could you also about barriers, and we talked a little bit about barriers to the central government, but could you say something about involving community, using businesses, civil society? Is it difficult, or do you have some good experiences, or anything you want to share about barriers on implementing climate action plans?
Yeah, I think we see three different types of barriers. The first is to get everyone on the same page, and I'm sure all of us mayors and people here in civil society understand that getting state government, federal government, city government working in the same direction, bureaucracy gets in the way sometimes. So that's a real barrier that you have to get. similar goals. The second is I think it's really important as we implement our solutions for climate change, we have to be very cognizant of the people who have borne the burden of climate change the most. And climate justice must underlie our solutions. And we're seeing that some of the things we want to implement will have the most direct impact on those same frontline communities. And so, for example, Seattle is one of the fastest growing cities in America and has become very expensive to live in. As a result, most of our communities of color have been pushed out of the city. Our minimum wage workers have been pushed out of the city. They have to commute further and further distances and sometimes aren't located by good transit. So they drive into the city. I want to impose congestion pricing for Seattle. I think it is the way to go. We're working towards it. But implementing that meant having a very serious study of what were the equitable impacts on those frontline communities, because we don't want our solutions to further aggravate the injustices that we've seen in the world and in America. So I think that's a barrier in a sense that we have to be very intentional, and sometimes that fights against our need and our urgency to act quickly.
Thank you very much. And Mayor Sowah, when you in Accra have discussion about how to involving people, you talked about waste management before, but it could be on broader agendas. What are the barriers to do this against state or against your population and your public? Could you share some experience about that?
Well, thank you very much. One of the key barriers is the fact that people do not want to pay for waste services. So once you introduce what we call the polluter pay system, that as you pollute the environment, you have to pay for it, and people were refusing to pay for the services. And the fact that the local authority, the city authority, is the one providing the services, they assume that once you pay for property rate or you pay for something else, it means that inherent in the bills that you've supplied to them, they are paying for the waste management, which is not entirely the case. The second challenge also is the fact that the big contractors that we also offer them the franchise to collect the waste, they are also seen by the same general public that they are doing the service for and on behalf of the city authority. And for that matter, people are reluctant to pay. And this is where the informal sector collectors also come in to fill in the gap. Indeed, the informal sector collectors, what they do, they are able to assess the waste very quickly and on time at any point in time. So they become more reliable, they offer more reliable services and the flexible payment terms more than the big contractors as well. The second challenge also that we had was the fact that most at times in the informal and low-income communities, we have a culture of burning waste. You generate your waste and you have to burn it. And that's the way we dispose of waste. And how to transit from the culture of burning waste to rather keeping the waste in a receptacle for the collector to come was also a major barrier. And we took drastic steps by making sure that people should not burn waste again. And finally, on the same score, then we have to provide receptacle also to them. And that's why, especially in the low-income communities, we are providing them with receptacle bins so that the informal sector collectors and the franchise holders will also come and collect it. So we are meeting them halfway, whilst they are also changing their culture of storing waste instead of burning waste.
Thank you very much. And this will conclude this session. Thank you so much for sharing your stories. Thank you so much for taking time to being in Copenhagen and share your stories. Please interact and get more information from these people and from each other during these days in Copenhagen. And I just want to end by saying, we know we have to do this. We know how to do it, even though businesses can't deliver everything right now, but we know how to do it. We just have to do it, and we have to do it now. So this was a panel discussion, a panel of hope, just like the moderator, Master of Ceremony, Connie, asked for. So please use the knowledge. Thank you for us.